In the heart of New Orleans, one man did what most only dream of. He escaped the system. But freedom came at a cost he couldn't afford. For months, his name echoed through the streets like a whisper the city couldn't silence. Derrick Groves. A convicted murderer turned fugitive. A man who slipped through the cracks of a crumbling jailhouse and vanished into thin air. Police swore they'd find him. The media painted him as a ghost. And the people? They turned him into a myth. Some saw him as a monster. Others, a legend who defied the odds. A man brave enough to challenge the cage that tried to hold him. But myths have an expiration date. From New Orleans to Atlanta, his shadow stretched across state lines. A $50,000 reward tracing every footstep, every rumor, every whispered secret. He outsmarted the law, evaded cameras, and for 5 long months, freedom was his closest friend and his most dangerous enemy. Until the day it all fell apart. A quiet neighborhood. A lover's quarrel. A sudden phone call that brought the world crashing down. Was Derrick Groves brought down by love, or by loyalty's price tag? You're watching Whispers of the Criminal Mind. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on the escape, the betrayal, and the haunting psychology of a man who thought he could outrun fate, but couldn't outrun himself. Every story begins somewhere. For Derrick Groves, it began in the humid backstreets of New Orleans, a city built on rhythm and rebellion. A place where music floats through cracked windows and survival becomes a daily melody. Derrick was born into struggle. Raised by a single mother who worked nights to keep food on the table, he grew up watching life through the lens of survival. Poverty didn't just shape his world, it sharpened him. In neighborhoods like his, you learn early that strength isn't a choice. It's instinct. He wasn't the biggest kid. Not the loudest either. But Derrick had presence, the kind of quiet confidence that made people listen when he spoke. He learned how to read a room, how to charm a crowd, how to turn pain into rhythm. By his late teens, that gift had a name: rap. Those who knew him back then say he had talent, real talent. His voice carried the hunger of the streets and the poetry of experience. Online clips showed flashes of raw genius, verses filled with reflection, rage, and rhythm. He wasn't just rapping to be heard. He was rapping to matter. Music became his escape, a world where he wasn't a statistic or a suspect, just an artist trying to breathe. But ambition is a double-edged sword, because the same fire that fuels creation can also burn everything around it. Derrick's charisma drew people in, but it also brought attention, the kind that doesn't always come with applause. The streets started whispering his name for reasons that had nothing to do with music. He wanted success, but success came slow. And when the dream felt too far away, the streets started looking like a faster route. There's a thin line between hunger and desperation, and Derrick began to blur it. Small run-ins with the law, petty theft, street fights, accusations that came and went. Nothing major at first, just the kind of trouble that seemed ordinary where he came from. But every arrest, every mugshot, every moment of humiliation, it chipped away at the man he was trying to be. Then came the turning point. Nobody knows exactly when it happened, when Derrick stopped chasing beats and started chasing respect. Some say it was the company he kept. Others say it was the pressure, the weight of being a young black man in a city that too often mistakes survival for crime. What's certain is this: something in him shifted. The artist became an outlaw. The charm turned to caution. The same confidence that once filled his lyrics started filling interrogation rooms. People who knew him described him as too smart for his own good. And maybe they were right. Derrick had a way of thinking 5 steps ahead, of reading people like lyrics, calculating his next move like a verse waiting to drop. But intelligence without direction can be dangerous. And soon, that sharp mind started working against him. His music began to fade into the background, replaced by darker pursuits, whispers of violence, rumors of debt, friends who vanished, opportunities lost. New Orleans had raised him, but now it was closing in on him. Some people say Derrick was a product of his environment. Others say he was a genius who turned his gift into a curse. Either way, the boy with a dream was gone. And in his place stood a man who believed he could rewrite his own fate, even if it meant breaking every rule to do it. By the time Derrick Groves turned 25, the energy that once fueled his ambition had darkened into something else. The music had stopped. The laughter of friends had thinned out. And the city that once inspired him now seemed to close its doors one by one. What happened next would change his name forever, from Derrick the rapper to Derrick the murderer. It began on a humid summer night in New Orleans. The air was thick, restless, and charged, the kind of night when tempers move faster than logic. Derrick had fallen into a dispute with two men, both locals, both connected to the same underground circles that had once supported his music. What started as business, money, maybe pride, turned into something much darker. Witnesses said it began with words, harsh and sharp like broken glass. Accusations were thrown, threats exchanged. And then, in the blink of an eye, the argument erupted into violence. Gunshots echoed through the neighborhood. Two men dropped. By the time police arrived, Derrick was gone, vanished into the maze of streets that raised him. The city woke up to headlines that morning: local rapper wanted for double homicide. The same face that once filled music videos was now on wanted posters. For many, the fall was hard to believe. For others, it felt inevitable. The motive was never crystal clear. Some said it was about money, a deal gone wrong. Others believed it was revenge, an old score resurfaced. But those closest to Derrick whispered something else, that he'd been spiraling, angry, frustrated, desperate to prove he was still in control. When the police caught up with him, Derrick didn't resist. He was quiet, almost detached. Some said he looked relieved. Others said he looked numb, like he'd already accepted what was coming. The trial that followed was short, but the story was long. Prosecutors painted him as cold, calculated, and dangerous. The defense argued he was a product of his environment, a man pushed too far by the circumstances around him. But the evidence was solid. Ballistics matched the weapon. Witnesses testified. And when the verdict came, the courtroom fell into silence. Guilty on all counts. The sentence was immediate: 2 consecutive life terms without the possibility of parole. For most, that would have been the end of the story. But for Derrick Groves, it was only the beginning. In prison, something in him hardened. The world outside went on, but his days became a loop of metal doors and muffled voices. Gone were the rhythms of New Orleans, replaced by the hum of fluorescent lights and the clang of chains against steel. Inside, he developed a new kind of rhythm. Not in music, but in planning. When you face a life behind bars, something changes inside you. Some surrender. Some plan. Derrick was a planner. He observed everything: the guard rotations, the timing of meals, the weak spots in the system. He read law books, learned schedules, made allies. He didn't talk much, but when he did, his words carried purpose. Even other inmates noticed. Derrick didn't move like a man who'd given up. He moved like a man with a clock ticking in his mind. Meanwhile, outside the walls, his story had faded. People had moved on. But inside, Derrick Groves was rewriting the next chapter. He had nothing left to lose. No family visits. No music career. No future that didn't end behind bars. All he had was time, and time is dangerous in the hands of a man who refuses to accept his fate. The same intelligence that once helped him write songs was now building blueprints in his mind. Every routine, every shift, every overlooked moment became a note in a symphony of escape. He didn't want redemption. He wanted freedom at any cost. And while the world believed Derrick Groves was just another inmate serving out a life sentence, behind those concrete walls, he was already halfway gone. The system thought it had buried him. But Derrick Groves was only getting started. It was a warm Sunday morning in New Orleans, July 2, 2023. The kind of morning when the air itself feels heavy, slow, indifferent. But inside the Orleans Parish Jail, something was stirring. Something no one saw coming. At 6:30 a.m., during what should have been a routine shift change, 10 inmates vanished. 10. No alarms. No sirens. No trace. By the time the guards realized what had happened, the escapees were long gone, melted into the waking streets of New Orleans like ghosts. Authorities later called it one of the most sophisticated jail breaks in Louisiana's history. But for those who knew Derrick Groves, they weren't surprised. Because Derrick wasn't just another inmate looking for a way out. He was planning his way out, and he'd been doing it for months. Reports suggest he studied the jail's ventilation layouts, memorized maintenance routes, and even manipulated his own cell block assignment to position himself closer to a blind surveillance zone. It wasn't chaos that freed them that morning. It was calculation. Every step, timed. Every move, rehearsed. Every mistake, covered. When investigators pieced together the security footage, they found something chilling. At 5:43 a.m., a camera feed went dark for exactly 13 minutes. When it came back on, the corridor was empty. And Derrick Groves' cell was open. Rumors began almost immediately. Some said there was inside help, a guard paid off, maybe threatened. Others whispered that Derrick had charmed his way into trust, using his old charisma to get information from those who didn't realize what he was building. But the truth was simpler and far more dangerous. Derrick had the patience to wait. And in a system built on routine, patience was his weapon. By noon that day, New Orleans was in lockdown. Police units swarmed the streets, helicopters hovered over the Mississippi, checkpoints went up across the city. 9 of the 10 inmates were caught within 48 hours, hiding in abandoned houses, under bridges, and inside stolen cars. Only one man stayed missing: Derrick Groves. The news spread fast. The rapper who escaped justice. Headlines lit up social media. Clips of his old music videos resurfaced, spliced against footage of police cars and flashing lights. He went from a forgotten inmate to a viral legend overnight. Some called him dangerous, others a folk hero. But Derrick didn't care about what the world thought. Because for him, freedom wasn't just physical, it was rebellion. It was defiance against the system he believed had buried him alive. He didn't just want to escape the bars, he wanted to prove he could outsmart them. For weeks he disappeared completely. No sightings. No clues. Not a single digital footprint. Authorities expanded the manhunt nationwide. The U.S. Marshals joined in, offering a reward. Every tip line rang nonstop. From Baton Rouge to Atlanta, people claimed to have seen him. In diners, on buses, at gas stations, but every lead turned to smoke. And that's where the fascination deepened. Because Derrick Groves wasn't just running, he was living. He'd learned from the mistakes of other fugitives. No phone calls. No social media. No friends. He moved like a shadow, blending into the forgotten corners of America. Small towns, late-night bus terminals, cheap motels where no one asked for ID. Somehow he managed to stay one step ahead. And with each passing week, the legend of Derrick Groves grew. Online, people dissected his escape like a crime documentary in real time. YouTubers analyzed his background. Reddit threads theorized his routes. How did he do it? Became a trending question. But Derrick wasn't watching the fame. He was watching the road. Psychologically, he was transforming. For Derrick, every breath of freedom was both victory and torment. Every sunrise outside those walls reminded him of what he'd lost, and what he'd risked. Freedom to him wasn't safety. It was vengeance. It was a message. In his mind, he wasn't a fugitive. He was a survivor of a system that failed him. He was proof that the state could lock his body but never his mind. Still, survival came at a price. He couldn't reach out to anyone from his old life. Couldn't write. Couldn't sing. He existed in silence, moving through cities under false names, working odd jobs for cash, sleeping light, always listening for the sound of boots outside the door. And yet, through all that paranoia, all that constant movement, Derrick remained invisible. For 3 months, the man everyone was hunting managed to disappear in plain sight. Until he made a mistake. It wasn't the kind of mistake that comes from carelessness. It came from emotion. Because no matter how hard you run, you can't outrun yourself. And Derrick couldn't escape one thing: the need for connection. A text. A visit. A single familiar face. That's all it took. But even the sharpest mind can't stay invisible forever. Especially when love enters the picture. Freedom has a sound. It's quiet at first, like the hum of a motel fridge, or the distant whistle of a night train. But for a fugitive, that sound changes. Every silence becomes suspense. Every knock on the door feels like a heartbeat too loud. Derrick Groves knew this sound all too well. After the escape, investigators traced whispers to Atlanta, a city big enough to hide in, but small enough to haunt you if you stayed too long. There he slipped into a life of shadows. A fake name. A prepaid phone. A job that paid in cash. Construction work by day, isolation by night. The man who once commanded crowds now moved like smoke. He rented a small apartment under an alias, far from the city center. He kept the curtains drawn. Never ordered food delivery. Never stayed in one place too long. But somewhere in those quiet weeks, Derrick met someone. A woman who didn't ask too many questions. To her, he was just a quiet man trying to rebuild a broken life. And in that lie, Derrick found something dangerously close to comfort. Their relationship grew in whispers, dinners cooked at home, walks after dark, laughter that felt borrowed from another lifetime. But love and fear don't coexist easily. For Derrick, every touch was a risk, every glance a calculation. When she'd step outside to get groceries, he'd pace by the window watching every stranger who passed. He slept light, ate little. And every night before bed he'd check the locks, twice then again. Freedom, when borrowed, comes with interest. And Derrick was paying it daily. The adrenaline that once thrilled him had become his curse. He learned to read people's eyes, to spot the slightest flicker of recognition. When police sirens passed on the highway, he'd freeze mid-breath. In his mind, paranoia wasn't fear, it was survival. Still, despite the constant vigilance, there were moments, fleeting, fragile, where he felt alive again. Cooking dinner. Watching rain hit the window. Holding someone who believed he could still be more than what he'd done. But deep down, Derrick knew the clock was ticking. Freedom wasn't permanent. It was borrowed time on a debt that always comes due. And every day he stayed free, that debt grew larger. He'd escaped the bars, yes. But the real prison, the one built from guilt, fear, and memory, followed him everywhere. By late September, Derrick Groves had been free for nearly 3 months. Long enough for hope to take root, and for the world to start forgetting. Until the number changed everything. $50,000. That's how much the U.S. Marshals were offering for information leading to his capture. $50,000, a sum large enough to shift loyalties, test friendships, and turn whispers into betrayals. In a world where rent's due and jobs are scarce, $50,000 isn't a reward, it's salvation. Police plastered his image across news feeds, bus stops, and digital billboards. The same mugshot that once symbolized defiance now served as temptation. The psychology of reward culture is simple. People convince themselves it's not betrayal, it's justice. And in Derrick's world, justice had always been for sale. Rumors spread fast. Some said it was his girlfriend who tipped them off, tired of living in fear, scared of what would happen next. Others pointed to a neighbor, someone who recognized the face from the evening news and made the call. No one knows the truth. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was self-preservation. Or maybe, just maybe, it was inevitable, because you can't live in hiding without leaving traces behind. Online debates raged. Was it loyalty or foolishness to protect a man like Derrick? Was it right to betray him for the money? And beneath all that noise was a darker question, one that echoed far beyond his story. When survival depends on betrayal, what does that say about us? The bounty had done its job. Because soon, Derrick's carefully constructed illusion of safety would collapse, not with a chase but with an argument. It happened on a quiet evening in Atlanta. An argument, loud enough for neighbors to hear, sharp enough to cut through the night air. They heard shouting, one witness said. Then silence, then sirens. It started small, jealousy, suspicion, maybe just fear breaking through the surface. Derrick had been living like a man walking on glass. Every secret pressed against him like a weight. Reports say his girlfriend tried to calm him down. Instead, it escalated. Voices rose. A door slammed. And somewhere in the chaos, someone made the call. Within minutes, the street was flooded with blue and red lights. The SWAT team surrounded the apartment. Helicopters hovered above. For 4 hours, the standoff gripped the city. Negotiators spoke through megaphones. Neighbors were evacuated. Reporters gathered outside like moths drawn to tragedy. Inside, Derrick sat alone by the window, staring at the flashing lights, the inevitable closing in. He didn't fight. He didn't run. When the door finally broke open, he raised his hands slowly and smiled. He escaped the system but not the cycle. Derrick Groves' capture wasn't about luck. It was about inevitability. Because no matter how far you run, the shadow you cast always finds its way home. The internet erupted. TikTok edits of Derrick's mugshot flooded timelines. Clips of his old music resurfaced with captions like, "He was misunderstood," or "Free Derrick Groves." Others called him a monster, demanding life without leniency. Social media made him a myth. But myths don't last long in a world built on likes and algorithms. True crime influencers dissected every moment of his escape. Podcasts speculated about the girlfriend, the motives, the psychology. And for weeks, Derrick's name became currency, traded in views, clicks, and content. What people forgot, though, was that behind the story were victims. 2 men who'd never see their families again. A community still grieving. But online, empathy comes second to engagement. The line between criminal and celebrity blurred until it vanished. Derrick wasn't just a fugitive anymore. He was entertainment. The fascination wasn't really about Derrick. It was about us, our obsession with the outlaw, the anti-hero, the idea of rebellion in a world that often feels unfair. And yet, every share, every view, every post, kept the cycle alive. Why do we root for the fugitive? Why do we cheer for the man running from the law instead of the lives left behind? Maybe it's because deep down we see part of ourselves in rebellion, in defiance. Maybe because we crave freedom even when it's stolen. But admiration has a cost. Every view, every comment that romanticizes the criminal blurs the line between fascination and forgiveness. And while we're busy building myths, the truth, the real human pain, fades into the background. Accountability isn't about cruelty. It's about balance. It's about remembering that justice isn't vengeance, it's closure. Derrick Groves had talent, charisma, a story worth telling. But he made choices that ended lives and destroyed his own. He could have been an artist. Instead, he became a cautionary tale. Justice isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's just the quiet truth that choices echo louder than excuses. To understand Derrick Groves, you have to look beyond the headlines. Beneath the crime and the chaos was a man driven by contradictions, brilliance and rage, charm and insecurity. He was charismatic, intelligent, emotionally volatile. He craved connection but feared rejection. He wanted to be remembered, yet couldn't handle being seen for who he really was. Every escape he made, from poverty, from failure, from prison, was never really from the world. It was from himself. Psychologists might call it narcissistic impulsivity, the belief that you're always one step smarter than the system. But behind that bravado was a deep fear of powerlessness. Derrick's real prison was never made of bars. It was built inside his own mind, a labyrinth of pride, guilt, and loneliness with no way out. Derrick Groves' story is one of ambition and collapse, of brilliance consumed by ego and desperation. It's about what happens when talent turns into tragedy, when the hunger for freedom outweighs the cost of peace. He outran the walls that confined him, but never the choices that defined him. In the end, freedom without peace is just another kind of cage. And every man who runs from accountability eventually discovers that the longest journey is the one back to himself. If there's one lesson to take from Derrick's story, it's this. Crime may thrill for a moment, but consequence lasts forever. You've been listening to Whispers of the Criminal Mind, where we dive deep into the stories that live between guilt and redemption. Until next time, keep your ears open, because the whispers never stop.